Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to another LinkedIn Live discussion. If you haven't met us before, we'll do a very brief intro in a moment, but we have been doing these LinkedIn Live discussions together for over 2 years now, picking out different topics for us to discuss from our different points of view. We do a little bit of prep, but we absolutely don't rehearse what we're going to exactly say, but we know that the overarching topic and where we both might want to go with it. So it is very much a relaxed discussion that we hope you enjoy listening to with us. My name is Luan Wise. I am a marketing consultant. I'm a practitioner. I've been in marketing now for over 25 years in a number of different roles, from working in agencies, working in-house as a marketer, and running my own consultancy business for the last nearly 14 years now, with a whole mixture of clients from B2B, B2C that I work with, and also delivering training. And if I had a specialism, it would be the world of social media.
And I'm Laura Chamberlain. I'm a professor at Warwick Business School at the University of Warwick, also a marketer. So I do keep my hand in the real world of marketing, and also working in the self-development space as well, which is why we have chosen the topic for this live session, because it is something that spans really nicely both marketing and personal professional development.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're talking about today, which hopefully you know because you signed up to the session,
you never know.
I mean, you never know. Strategic thinking, essentially, and how we use strategic thinking to navigate the challenges that marketers are currently facing, why it's important for marketing, and how we can develop it as a skill, really. And so we're going to have a bit of a ranging conversation today around strategic thinking, sharing probably our own personal perspectives, experiences, and also some practical tips on how to develop strategic thinking and where we can go with it. So as a starting point, I wanted to talk about what strategic thinking is. And my really quick definition for strategic thinking is that it is problem solving with a plan. So it's not just the art of thinking. Mm-hmm. Some would say that's more like critical thinking, so thinking about different perspectives. The strategic part is about how you develop a plan to move you forward in some way. So there is a trajectory around the thinking that you're doing. And for me, strategic thinking is really closely linked to being a skill. So it's something that you can develop. It's something that you can practice. It's something that you can also measure whether you're getting good at it or where there are areas for improvement. But it's really closely linked to mindset as well. And so many of you will be familiar with Carol Dweck's work and the growth mindset. But for me, I think it is also linked to change mindset. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we move through. But actually, that then links to this idea of strategic agility. So it's about being able to anticipate and adapt to changes that are happening and swiftly. So that means not necessarily quickly, but in a considered manner that is one that allows you to address something that is happening in your environment or in your workspace or a challenge that has come up, and allows you to create that plan to solve the problem that you've identified. So that's my quick starting point on where I sit in what strategic thinking is. And we should also say as well, I forgot to say at the beginning, if you've got comments or questions, please do pop them in the chat. We're very happy to run an interactive session. So I guess my first question, if you want to interact, is do you agree? Do you think that's a really accurate definition, or do you think there's something that you could add to that definition? Do you think about strategic thinking differently, or is it something that is aligned with what I've just said? On the topic of thinking about how we anticipate and adapt to changes, I know you wanted to start there, Luan. So do you want to bring that in?
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of say our previous discussions have often been about skills and competencies. So when we think about what the topics are, and I know there's a clear difference between the two, this was a topic that we decided on because we both hear feedback around, oh, I've been told to be more strategic, or I want to be more involved in strategy. And we both hear it all the time and, will continue to do so. But for me, it's that word strategy that I feel is often misunderstood and overused in potentially the wrong way, in terms of people saying, oh, this is going to change my strategy, when actually it's tactics and
100%.
implementation.
The conflation of tactics and strategy is a big problem. And I know you addressed that actually in your most recent book, around really separating those out and understanding, what is strategy, what are tactics, and how you think about both of those things in the social media context.
Yeah.
But actually, one of the most awful pieces of feedback I hear being given to employees, marketers, is you need to be more strategic. It's like this band-aid piece of feedback that people use when they don't really actually know what to say. And sometimes when you go back and say, well, what do you mean I need to be more strategic? You get a waft of the hand, do more strategy, be more strategic. And people giving that feedback don't actually know what they're asking for. It just sounds good. And it's really hard then to action that feedback if it's very vague. But also the other counterpoint to that is people don't necessarily know how then, even if it is a credible and concrete piece of feedback that people genuinely do need to start being more strategic, what then to do in order to achieve that. So there's two sides to that coin, but it is something that's often overused and misunderstood.
Yeah, and then everything that it involves of I'm writing a strategy, I'm being more strategic, I'm thinking about strategy. It's like, that's not always true. And I think if we pull it back, you mentioned the book, one of the research questions in there with people working in social media was, do you know how your social media activity aligns with the business plan? And over 40% of people, when we ran the survey in 2020 and 2022, said no, they didn't know how it aligned with the business plan. And there's all those other things that roll out after it, isn't it? So I think that's for me why I am quite specific in my language around it's a strategy or it's a plan, and you can't dive straight into the tactics of it.
Absolutely. And you have to do the strategic thinking, so the problem solving, to create the plan in order to know which tactics to use. And that's why I frame it as problem solving with a plan.
And if you're planning, you need to ask questions of the strategy if you haven't been given it, if you haven't been part of it. And the number of training sessions I've delivered, and I'll say, what objectives have you been set, or what's the vision for the next 3 years for your business, trying to raise it back up to the big picture. And those that have been tasked with doing something don't have that information and haven't asked for that information.
Oh, absolutely. And then you also see, I was working with an organization a few months ago, and they were subject to what we'd call SPOTS, so a strategic plan on the shelf, SPOTS. They'd done this lovely strategy and then done nothing with it. It was like, oh yeah, here's our beautiful strategy. And then it was like, and then how are you implementing your strategy? And that's often a disconnect that can happen as well. It is bridging the strategic thinking and the plan into actually moving towards the tactics as well. So it's not straightforward. I think that's why we wanted to spend a bit of time talking about it today.
Yeah, and that's the big picture stuff, isn't it? So if we do go back to, what are the big challenges that are informing the strategy, driving the strategy, and how we respond to it, the big challenges that I'm seeing and reading about and having conversations about are, of course, marketing budgets. If there's one thing, not just a marketer, but people in business, we always want more resources, whether that's time, money, people, tools, equipment, etc. But research that's come out from Gartner, their annual CMO spend surveys, that marketing budgets are falling by an average of 15% year on year. But not just that, as an overall percentage of company revenue as well. It was 11% in 2020 and it's now 7.7%. So it is dropping quite significantly. And no doubt most marketers are being asked to do more with less.
Speaking of which, I've just made a note on my notepad, because sometimes when we do this, something
Moved
pops
on.
into my brain that I hadn't prepared to think about. But it actually is something I read this morning. In Marketing Week, I think it was, that the CMO of Innocent is moving to be the Director of Marketing and Innovation. So they're getting rid of the CMO title. And I know there's been a lot written about that. But for me, when I was looking at that, you could read that as a bit doom and gloom. And I know some people are talking a lot around the role of the CMO and how that's evolving and changing and what that means in line with marketing budgets. But actually, to link the marketing function with innovation in a company like Innocent made a lot of intuitive sense to me from a strategic point of view, because actually they are known for being quite innovative, and a lot of the work that they did, particularly at the outset when they burst onto the scene as they did when they came to the market, has actually been so ingrained with innovation. So I would suspect, looking at it, that there's been quite a lot of strategic thinking around why that move has been made and what that means internally within the business. So I think as well you can see the different ways this is all sort of changing and panning out in the market in terms of roles that are changing as well. And there is obviously some negative signs, but there's obviously companies that are thinking very seriously about things within the business structures and how to create perhaps agility or improvements. So I don't know if you saw that news this morning, I think it was.
I think I've read some headlines around how job titles are changing, which I think also brings us onto the job market, doesn't it? And how, there are roles in marketing and other functions now that didn't exist before. The scope of job descriptions seems to get ever broader for marketers as well, and the skill set and the requirements that it involves. I saw an article earlier in the week from Raconteur, I think, that said, in the last couple of years, we've had quiet quitting and leaving jobs and moving on. Now it's about the big stay, and people are staying in their jobs and needing to upskill in their existing jobs rather than moving on. So there's always uncertainty and fluctuations in the job market, on top of still working from home, returning to the office, hybrid remote working, and everything that comes around jobs as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you said that. I tried really hard not to roll my eyes. I don't know if I managed it, but I'm not saying that to say like the gig stay isn't a thing. Of course, the eye roll that happened in my mind was because there's always something, and it just feels really exhausting at the moment that we're, what are the priorities?
What should we be
There's
doing?
a lot of noise around this whole issue, and I'm finding it actually
overwhelming and confusing.
I find it difficult to think strategically about a way forward, and that's a really interesting point actually. If thinking about this idea of challenges, how do we navigate our way through flex working, demands for working from home, people being forced back into the office, the demands of what it means to be a marketer. So if you're working in an agency, for example, you have to be here, there and everywhere, and perhaps you have to go visit clients because that is something on. You have to go pitch, what that sort of looks like in the hybrid and high flex world. Also, if you're a freelancer, what that means in terms of where you are and what you do. Are people quitting? Are they staying? I think this is one of our strategic thinking problems that actually as marketers we need to start addressing, is how we want to move forward with this. And so that's kind of where my eye roll came from, because I think it is actually something that we need to think really strategically about. And it's not that everybody needs to agree, but there is something there around that. But on the subject of careers particularly, when people say to me, how can I be more strategic? How can I think more strategically? One of the first things that I advise is, yes, find opportunities in your professional life, in work. So you need to find, marketing opportunities to be more strategic. And we'll talk about those as in a moment. But your first port of call can always be yourself and your own professional development. And good careers don't happen by accident. So my company is Think Talk Thrive, and it's a professional development and professional development and career strategy agency, because you need to have a strategy around your career. And that doesn't mean if you're just in the job market, if you're active in the job market, if you want to progress in your career, and not everybody does, okay, you may be sort of where you need to be and you're absolutely fine with it. But if people want to progress, they need to have a plan, and they need to think strategically about what their opportunities are. And particularly in the era of squiggly careers, where career trajectories are not linear, and that's the work that I'm referencing by the incredible ladies from Amazing If. They coined the term squiggly careers, which has entered into our lexicon now. It's like, it's so dominant. It's wonderful what they've done, but I actually feel a little bit sorry. It's Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis, because it's almost like it's the Hoover of the careers world. Like, everybody's talking about the squiggly career and not necessarily like linking it back to them. They invented this whole terminology. But anyway, but in the era of the squiggly career, where things are not linear, and we really need to own our own career trajectory and to figure out what makes us fulfilled and thriving, putting a strategy behind that is really powerful. And so I always advocate that if you want to practice your strategic thinking, the best starting place is your own career, your own development. It's a great way to start flexing your strategic thinking muscle and creating an understanding of where you want to go and what plan you can construct to help you get there.
And we haven't talked about this, but I've never really planned my career. For a planner, my career hasn't been planned. But when I was thinking about this and knew we were talking about it, in a sense, it's not long-term planned, but I do have a set of questions that I apply when opportunities come arise. Like, is that a good fit? Do I think I can perform well for them? Will I enjoy it? You know, what does this mean? Can I do my best? And for me, it then brought in that classic quote about strategy is also about choosing what not to do, as well as what you should, you want to do as well. It's sometimes a process of elimination of, that's interesting, but it's not the right fit for me, or not the right time for me. So I think for me, it's about those questions and filters.
Oh, 1,000,000%. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but that's why I never encourage people to set goals, because goals are binary. You either hit them or you don't. I like people to set ambitions. What would I like to achieve? Because there's lots of different routes to getting there. And one of the tools that I use is something called a Thrive map. So figuring out like what are the different ways in which you can get to where you want to go, but also what thriving looks like for you, not like a concrete measure of success. Because if you don't hit it, then you've somehow failed, which is not helpful nor true. So there's a lot there around thinking strategically around your careers, but a lot of the traditional ways of goal setting and stuff I find really unhelpful, because it doesn't allow for the flexibility, like you say. I mean, I definitely did not plan my career in any like, I always joke and say, if I told 18-year-old me where I am now, I would have just fallen about laughing and just not believed it. So yeah, I think there's a lot there. Anyway, I did go down a rabbit hole. Sorry. Pull me back from the rabbit hole.
Well, okay, but even if you were trying to plan and you're advocating plan, that is actually really, really difficult because of these challenges. So I'm going to bring it back to those other challenges around, we've both said all the news headlines about what we should be doing or what the patterns are out there. And then the other big one is around AI. Is this going to take my job, or is this an amazing productivity tool that I should be using? And there's opportunities in it and there's challenges. So we're living in our work and the wider world around us in just so much constant change all the time. It makes some of this quite difficult, but requires thinking even more.
I think that's where critical thinking becomes a precursor to strategic thinking. So I talk about them as different, because critical thinking is about weighing things up. It's around not just believing everything that you're reading, for example. It's around synthesizing information, analyzing information, evaluating, and creating your own viewpoint. And that can change, of course. You don't have to have I've made my decision on what AI means for me, but it is taking the information that's around there and thinking, okay, what does this mean for me? What am I worried about? But actually, where are the opportunities? My specialism in marketing, or I'm a generalist in marketing, and this is what it means for me. And this is what it means for me now, today. It means for me short term and potentially longer term. But also, what can I control? What are the things that I can do? So with AI being a classic example, if AI is something that either interests you or scares you, either one of those two things, and I use the word scare kind of liberally to mean, is it a threat to you? Is it something that you're worried about? The best thing you can do is to learn about it. And so then that critical thinking, what can I control? I can control my learning. That's when you then transcend into strategic thinking. I want to learn more about AI. What do I need to know? And then how do I create a plan to allow myself to get there? So that might be about learning stakeholders, sort of understanding the resources, finding specialists, people to follow, podcasts to listen to, whatever it may be. Might want to attend something that Luan's doing fairly soon. I'll just drop that in there for you, Luan. But
we've got an AI, social media and AI LinkedIn Live coming up in the middle of June.
Which I'm looking forward to, definitely. Not with me, though. That's not
not with
you.
You
said we.
No,
with,
we. Sorry, myself and Andy.
I was going to say, that sounded weird. It's not we. But yeah, so it's things like that. And that's how you move from thinking critically about an issue, identifying, the problem that you're trying to solve, how you're going to do it, and then creating a plan. And that plan, again, doesn't have to be set in stone, but you could look at your learning stakeholders and think, okay, what am I going to do? Now, I said when it comes to careers, don't set goals because of the way life works. But with stuff like this, you could then think about, okay, what are the stages? What's manageable for me? So I'm currently on maternity leave. I have an 8-month-old daughter and a nearly 4-year-old son. How is he nearly 4? Anyway. And my life is pretty hectic. So if I want to set myself a learning plan at the moment, in reality, I am listening to podcasts. So for me, I'm listening to things while I'm doing other stuff. So it's podcasts, audiobooks. That's manageable for me right now. If you said to me, here's a physical book or a book to actually read, not a chance. So it's not about putting pressure on yourself. Again, it's that strategic thinking around what is manageable, what you can do to help you move towards what you want to achieve. And I think people think that a strategic plan in that sense has to be quick. I have to do everything all at once. It can be a slow burn. You can just set yourself, I want to learn 2 new things about AI per month, and that's enough. It could be that.
Yeah. I think the word that we've both used in the past is being curious, isn't it? So it goes back to that asking questions and the curiosity. And I like your point about everyone has a different learning style as well. So actually, I'm not really an audiobook person because my mind goes, but you were probably up early this morning. I was up at 5 reading a book because I can get up at that time of day, have a cup of coffee, it's quiet, and read a couple of chapters of a book.
Your 5 o'clock looks a lot different to mine right now. She laughs slightly manically. Yeah. Anyway,
so we'll talk about asking questions, and I think that's probably an easy thing to say is ask questions. But I know that if we were to have this discussion with a group of people, they go, yeah, but how do I know what question to ask? I don't know what I don't know, so how do I dive into it and take that next step? Okay, I know what I need to do, but I'm not sure where to go with this. What frameworks have you got for us? Because I know you've got some.
Of course I've got frameworks.
We said we had frameworks.
Always got a framework. So there's tons of different things to do. And just on the point of curiosity, this is curiosity is my current playground at the moment. I'm doing quite an exciting piece of work around curiosity, which I can't say too much about now, but there's more to come on that. But it is just so interesting and such an interesting area. But how can you cultivate strategic questions? Well, there are certain things that you can do around techniques. So not just frameworks per se, but there are things that you can do to sort of inspire your thinking. So stuff like random input, which is where you introduce something seemingly completely random into a thought process to almost disrupt conventional thinking patterns. So you can use things like a random word generator. So you might be designing a customer experience, use a random word generator and use that as inspiration to think about how you can reframe that. There are techniques and things that you can borrow from design thinking, like Scamper. That's a technique, which is like a checklist of questions. So looking at a complex problem or a product or something, and using SCAMPER. So it's substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, or reverse. So you kind of look at what it is that you're looking at through those different angles. Like, could you adapt it? Could you reverse it? So do it in a different opposite way. Could you take something away, like eliminate something? So there's all those kinds of frameworks that we can use. From a marketing point of view, though, because we are marketers, we can use our strategic thinking tools and our frameworks. And this is not anything new to many of us. So things like really basic ones, PESTEL, looking at the environment around us. I mean, all the things that we've been talking about, it is a really simple tool. SWOT is another one. Again, a really simple tool, but again, can really help with strategic thinking. Now, I'm going to have a massive caveat on SWOT. Because SWOT can be really, really powerful as a tool, but if it's not used well, it is terrible as a tool. So if it's just used to create bullet points and nothing happens to the bullet points, and it's not used as a thinking tool, it's used as like a data capture tool, then it is worthless. But if you use SWOT in different ways, so thinking about the combination of the different elements, doing some analysis using what's come out of the SWOT, then it can be really powerful. And there is a lot to be said for its simplicity. The reason why I'm like going in a little bit on SWOT particularly is because there has been some discussion in marketing around SWOT, and there's some quite prominent voices that have been very negative about the use of SWOT in our industry. And they are basically saying what I've just said, like if it's not used well, it's useless. The problem that then comes is that people see the headline, i.e. don't use SWOT, and then they throw it out of their toolkit. And so I had a case recently. I'm an academic in residence, part of a community, and I had done a session about SWOT. And somebody said to me that in their company, they absolutely can't use SWOT because everybody subscribes to the viewpoint of this very prominent figure and won't even give it any airtime or any consideration. And so essentially, I sort of wrote back and said, well, nobody should be SWOT shamed. I don't believe that. Like, I think every tool has a place, and it's about what people are comfortable using and how it sparks that strategic thinking. There is no tool better than another tool. And so another way to think about this is my colleague at Warwick, Professor Nick Lee, he talks about how when you go to a art gallery, you'll see a sculpture, and quite often they'll have like spotlights on the sculpture to highlight different parts of the beautiful sculpture and whatever it might be. And essentially what we're doing with our tools, our SWOT or our PESTEL, is taking a spotlight onto the sculpture, so whatever the marketing problem is or the marketing issue is that we're looking at, and highlighting certain bits of it, and then admiring it or doing something with it strategically, right? So there's not this idea that one tool is better than another. It just does something slightly different. So you might be moving the spotlight somewhere else or using the spotlight in a different angle. But there should never be this idea that something is better than the other. I feel quite passionate about it. Sorry, I've gone off on one of my rants.
No. Well, I'll share with you, you know, I'm in full agreement of these tools, and I don't think you've seen it complete yet. My next book out in September, in the appendix is PESTEL and SWOT analysis and what it is. And I think they are great tools. They feel like they're something that, you know, I learned them many years ago. And it feels like you can do it really quickly by putting the headings up and then putting some bullet points and having it on a flip chart in a meeting. That's fine to come up with some bullet points under the headings quite quickly. It's the reflection on it and what does this mean and what do we need to do next. So for me, and I've heard those conversations as well, it's because that the tools aren't being used properly or in depth
Oh,
enough. They're being used as a quick win. I've put 5 things in each of the 4 boxes. Let's move on. They're great for a summary of a business case or a report, but you've got to do all the work behind it to get to the SWOT. You can't just go straight in with the bullet points or the points under the pestle headings.
Yeah, I think one of the worst things in reporting that I see is actually like the SWOT table being included. That should never be in the main report. It should be, if you put it anywhere, in the appendix.
Yeah.
Even if you need to show your workings, to use like a term from my school days. But actually, it's the outputs from that SWOT analysis. It's called a SWOT analysis for that reason. So what is the strategic thinking that's come out of that SWOT that is allowing you to think about how you address what's come out? Another way of looking at it as well is something that I have developed, and it's very much in its infancy, and it's not a polished article, but I'm happy for people to contact me if they'd like a copy, if they'd like to try it out. I've looked at SWOT in a number of different ways and changed the focus of SWOT. So I've developed a number of different ways of thinking about SWOT applied to different marketing contexts. And that really is, for the people that have started to use it, helping them and facilitating the way that they're thinking about how SWOT can actually be valuable in their context. So, you know, there's different ways of adapting and thinking about things and making the tools work in a way that is more meaningful. And so the way I'm rethinking and reconceptualizing how we use SWOT, again, more on that to come, hopefully will help and enable people to think more strategically using this tool. Because I mean, even when we teach it at universities, you know, students have done it once and then it does get brought out a lot in lots of modules, and so you end up saying, well, now we do a SWOT analysis, and you get an eye roll. But the problem is because they're not necessarily using it in a way that's varied or linked to real challenges, and I'm trying not to be negative, because it's you have to simulate a challenge many times, or you know, or retrospect, and that never works with a SWOT. Like if you say to students, like, this is what happened in a company, now do a SWOT analysis, what should they have done? Well, they already know what the answer is because they know what happened. So it's tricky, but that's why you get the eye roll, because the basics get taught, and then the application and the variety of application, which comes from real world experience, is often not easy to deliver in that taught environment. Yeah, not impossible.
But you kind of briefly mentioned there another point around scenario planning and using that as well. So you've got all these nice models and tools, but actually playing it out.
Yeah, scenario planning is a great one, and I use the SCQA framework for that. So that's situation, complication, question, and answer. You can always also use like horizon scanning. I love horizon scanning. So short-term improvements, new ideas and opportunities, and then what would happen if we took away like the constraints or the rules of today, or our current reality, and looked at our opportunities through that. So that kind of idealistic lens, which is my favorite one, because I love going off in innovative and weird directions. So they're more sort of general strategic thinking tools, and I think as marketers we can play around with both, like our traditional marketing tools, our new marketing tools, because there'll always be new ones that come out. And I'm not saying that we have to stick with traditional ones. It's just about finding the right spotlights, but also then thinking and exploring what other industries and other people are using for strategic thinking, because I'm a big fan of being inspired elsewhere as well. So, and I think in organizations, when I work with organizations on strategic thinking, I work on developing a strategic thinking blueprint for that organization, which is a really powerful way of thinking about what we want to achieve, how strategic thinking can move the organization forward, how it means that they can address challenges swiftly, but also what's in their toolkit, and what are the different ways they can play to their strengths with that. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do to bring the frameworks together, particularly at an organization or a team level, to develop a strategic thinking blueprint.
Do you think one of the biggest challenges is going back to that pace of change, and also the pace of work, that actually sometimes it's hard to make the time to think strategically?
100%.
And that's why we're trying to dive straight into things and get things done and get them out of the way, whereas actually we need to take that step.
Yeah, and it's hard to carve that out.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm laughing to myself because I would love to see, when people do those team building days and away days, I would love to see strategic thinking front and center in those, and everybody tries to do it and they don't do it very well.
Mm-hmm.
Not always. That's really harsh. Not always. But I think many people will have had a team building day. We're going to have a strategy day, and it's like, oh god. But actually, really making those worthwhile and enjoyable, because I find when you have a strategy day and it goes really well, it is so energizing for the team.
Yeah.
Everybody buys in. It's brilliant. One of the ways to do that is to build curiosity into that scenario, for sure. But yeah, the constant change is just overwhelming. And you talk to freelancers as well, and freelancers will often talk about the need to that they're working in their business so much, but sometimes they need to step out and work on their business, which can be really tricky. So it's, everybody needs to take the time to do this, and it's not easy to achieve.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it's a bit of a luxury, but actually if we can make time for it, it will reap its rewards short term and long term.
And well. It's like the important and urgent
matrix
situation, isn't it? Strategic thinking is important, but actually on your to-do list, something urgent probably will take its place. And so there's also something there as well around whose responsibility is it to think strategically. And people might go, oh well, that's for the big bosses, they're the ones that need to think strategically. But actually I would say no, and because it's a skill, it's something that we all need to invest in developing and practicing in every area of our work and what we're doing, and not leaving it to somebody else, because actually I would argue if you leave it to somebody else, you get left behind.
Then on that point of like thinking it's someone else's role, is there maybe an issue of this isn't my role, or I shouldn't be doing this, and that's not my space to ask questions? How can we be more confident to do that?
That's a great one.
I see people, it's almost like that fear of like, I don't want to question something, or I'm not sure this is right, but I'll keep that to myself because I don't feel that it's my place to do that.
Yeah, and there's confidence around
not me
that.
personally.
There's a confidence issue. I mean, for me, it's a link between curiosity and confidence. So with curiosity, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, earlier in their career, they were told to stay in their lane and not to bother about things that weren't for them, because they were naturally quite curious. And so I think there is some caveats around curiosity and what's appropriate. But actually, it's about having the confidence to ask questions and to understand more. But actually, if you come through the lens of curiosity, it's not judgmental. It's like, I just want to find out more. I'm just trying to learn. And having the confidence to address the change, to think things through, to take the time to do that. That's really, really powerful. So for me, it's the combination of confidence and curiosity.
And I think sometimes it's having someone to bounce that off as well, isn't it? And having, a mentor or a coach and someone to have ask those questions to make you feel more confident doing it regularly in meetings or other conversations.
Absolutely. And I think just a point on that, mentoring doesn't have to be top down. It can be peer-to-peer. And so having somebody that you can bounce ideas around with is hugely powerful. I mean, that's how this came about, is that we chat about stuff, and we love marketing, and we bounce ideas around and off each other. And quite often when we're talking, we'll spark a thought, and it'll be like, oh yeah. And off we go in a different direction, as we've already done numerous times in this conversation today.
And we share articles, so we'll see something, it's like, I think this, but I want to know what someone else thinks, and I think it's finding those sparring partners or people that can be your critical friend as well, that aren't just going to go, yes, I agree, but have you thought about, or this is another approach to it.
Yeah, and that comes from a place of mutual respect, right?
Yeah.
Because you would happily challenge me, Laura, I do not agree with you, and vice versa.
Yeah.
But I think we both come at it from a learning lens, which is
Yeah.
where we're always like, oh, that's really interesting what you said. That I'd like to know more about why you think that and what your experience has brought to the table. And I think there's something there as well around having a diversity of experience.
Yeah.
That's also really powerful. Because talking back about our careers, we've come from quite different backgrounds. We've had very different career paths. We've worked in similar spaces, but also very, very different spaces. And I think there's something really nice there when you can sort of share perspectives and ask questions, but also never feel stupid, never feel like there's a silly question. I always say at university, like, the only silly question is one that remains unasked.
Yeah.
And I think it's finding those people that you can just figure things out with and chat and sort of have that safety element to those conversations, which is really powerful.
Yeah, I think my point is that you don't have to do the strategic thinking by yourself, and you probably shouldn't do it by yourself. It is something that you need lots of inputs into.
That's why people avoid it, because it then feels so enormous.
Yeah,
it feels overwhelming. That's the word you used before, isn't
it? Because we can make one decision today and then the world changes tomorrow, or something else happens, or a new tool appears, and that's where it kind of often feels like things are thrown up in the air again, which is probably why we do dive into quick fixes and tactics rather than the bigger step back thinking.
But then there's the word that just popped into my mind as you were talking then, is the word support. I think as things change, by having that strategic thinking bedrock in terms of knowing the tools that you have, the way that you can go about it, a blueprint if that's something that's relevant to your organisation or team, or an informal strategic thinking structure, network, sparring partners, as you put it, around you, you're then supported to think strategically. And when we were talking about it, then we were in danger of making it sound like it's an activity that's ad hoc. It's something that should be happening, in my view, all the time.
All day. Yeah.
All the time. So it's not something like on Mondays I do some strategic thinking, or like the second Wednesday of every month, that is my strategic thinking time. It is a skill. It's a muscle that we can flex. And so that everything, the more you flex it, the more you start to look at things through a strategic lens, and it becomes second nature. So it's not something that's necessarily even obvious to you, but it allows you to find the path forward. And that's what it is, really. It's about finding the path forward through a plan, problem solving with a plan, to have some kind of forward momentum for yourself or your business. So
yes,
that's what I would say.
I do think, I think it's ongoing, but there's also different times of day, isn't there? I would definitely say I'm more of a strategic thinker in the morning than perhaps after 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, and so there is that kind of finding the time. But it's not just time, it's mental space. That's the thing for me as well. I am better when I've not got a to-do list, or that's really got loads of urgent things on it, or like there's people who need something from me quite in an important way. If I can carve out the time, so taking a walk, or whatever that might look like for you, that's when my strategic side of my brain suddenly will sort of kick in. Or in the shower. That's what I
say. It's when you've got that. It is when you've got that space, isn't it? It's
we moved house a few years ago, and I used to have quite a long commute to work, and that used to be my prime thinking time, my big commute to and from work. And we moved, so we really reduced our commute, which is great in so many ways. But I was like, oh, I really miss that thinking time. So I've had to find other ways to build it into my life.
Drive around the block a couple of times on the way.
No, I've not got to that. It's not got that bad yet. Like, what's Laura doing? She's just on a long drive to nowhere.
Just sat in the car park. Maybe when you're back from maternity leave, you'll find that. We could, as you can probably tell, talk about any of these topics for a long time, but I think we've probably got to quite a place today to park this one. But we have already talked about our next session. It's already live to register, which is going to be in July. We've got very organised on this one, and we're going to be talking about the topic of personal branding and how this is something not just for marketers, but marketers in particular need to market themselves and talk about themselves, whether this is you supporting yourself in your current role in your career and everything else. We're going to have a live discussion about our thoughts on personal branding.
Yeah, I've got some quite controversial views on this one. So.
Oh. Well, we've got to wait about 6 weeks. There's ages. Thank you, Laura. As always, thank you for those that have watched live. I've seen a few comments, but no questions. But if you do have comments or questions afterwards, or you're watching this on replay, do pop them in there, because we will both keep an eye on it. The recording will be there in a few minutes, and I will see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.